Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk 9527. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we're back with Punk 4507. He's a clean 2 Atty with normal black beard and a grey forward cap. In real life though, he's a passionate and accomplished storyteller, designer, having earned an Emmy Award nomination for some of his work. He's worked with some of the best well-known names across platforms in television, film, and video games, and also designed and creative directed title sequences for Metal Gear Solid, Aquaman, X-Men First Class, and Sherlock Holmes, to name a few. He now currently serves as creative director for Apple TV and also a Punk Maxi. Please welcome Simon Clowes to the show. Simon, welcome to PunkCast. How are you?
Hey, Max. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I was celebrating from the sidelines as soon as I saw you buy your punk on Twitter, but also I think your note also went to show how much in-depth research you went into punks as well. So I think it sounds like you've got a bit of a deep appreciation for punks too.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of research went into that. It was not a small feat to actually make that acquisition. So definitely was taking some time to research. And yeah, your podcast actually played a huge role in that. I listened to a lot of the interviews leading up to the time that I was about to make that purchase. And so, yeah, thanks a lot for providing all that information and interviewing all of these greats. I mean, my imposter syndrome was definitely kicking in leading up to this conversation. You've met so many, a lot of OGs, a lot of greats in the space, a lot of, names that I really look up to in the space too. So when you reached out, it's definitely an honor to be here with you.
Ah, fantastic. No, and so nice to sort of hear you sort of say that as well. So I'm not sure who actually gets onto PunkCast at some stage, but hopefully the stories inspire other people that are interested in Web3, getting into the punks community. But welcome to PunkCast. I'd love to sort of maybe just get into your background a little bit. Would love to understand, where you sort of grew up, where you sort of came from, and how you got to where you were. Because I think just going through a bit of your background, it's super fascinating, and how deep you've sort of been and accomplished you've been in the design sort of space. But maybe you could just sort of start with that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for doing some of that research. And there's definitely not a straight path. I think there's a lot of twists and turns, but always in retrospect, everything seems like all of the dots connected how they should have. I would say, my journey as an artist started when I was a kid, and there was this weird defining moment when I was around 5 years old. And it was when I knew I wanted to take drawing seriously and I wanted to actually be creative. And again, in retrospect, I feel like it was the first time I actually got competitive. And it's one of those moments that I really remember. A friend of mine at the time, he was drawing monsters. And so I started to draw monsters. I was like, oh, like this is really cool. And I wanted to be better at drawing monsters than him as well. And so I say this to say, it was definitely my first competitive memory, and I was only 5 years old. And since then, I feel like I've made sure that I've always had competition in everything that I do. Even if people don't know it, they in fact, are competition in a healthy way. And I think all through my creative life, whether it's been through high school and college, there's always been somebody in the class that I've really looked up to and that I've kind of wanted to, secretly beat and be better at. And again, it's this healthy competition that's really helped me along the way. And I kind of figured out early that I needed to surround myself with these people. And in this case, it was artists and designers. And I never wanted to be the best at anything going into it. And luck would have it, I wasn't. And there was always somebody there that really inspired me. And I wanted to learn, and I wanted to learn through observation so that I could be better. And, you need to have these people around you that really push you. Um, and so, yeah, I was, going back to where I grew up. I grew up in London in a town called Cricklewood in northwest London. As an only child. And I used to entertain myself just drawing at home. And, my mother encouraged it. I'd stay with my grandma. I always remember having paper and pencils and colored crayons and drawing. And, she just made sure that she really supported the creativity all the way through school, all the way through high school. So, she definitely really was, I would say, pretty monumental in my decision making, because a lot of the time you have parents that could maybe not really support the creative side of things. And I think that's pretty common. Friends that I would have growing up and what I would hear from other people, I just really appreciate that the creative was supported there. And she would always, I think, spend money on experiences and travel. And that also played a big part in my creative passion. And I think being able to travel and see new things and be inspired and find inspiration that way versus, I think, spending money on material things. That was something that she really instilled in me, was the traveling. And getting good artistic references from other cultures along the way.
So, you mentioned you were generally competitive and you like drawing monsters at a very young age. I guess, what is it about drawing and art that you sort of enjoy the most? And the second part to that question is like, what other things did you sort of start drawing from then on?
Yeah, so drawing was the foundation, and that led to more of like a fine art pathway for me. Painting, oil painting, drawing, sketching, still life. It's quite very traditional, and I think in London particularly, there's a huge emphasis on like art history. We'd reference a lot of the greats, and I was I got really good at copying, and I would take, paintings from Michelangelo, and I would wanted to paint them and see how good I could get by copying the paint strokes and looking at the lighting. And Salvador Dali was another huge influence, surrealism. Um, it just, yeah, I think I really gravitated towards seeing how well I could replicate things first, whether that was through painting or sketching. And then I started to get into design. And, in high school, we have traditional pathways of, fine art, design. At the time, it was called design and technology. And that kind of opened my eyes up to, actually making things with your hands in 3 dimensions, woodwork and everything else around that. And I think then that led me to graphic design. And graphic design was difficult at first. I think there was a lot of, it felt a little bit restricted versus fine art, where you could be a bit more expressive with painting. And my fine art teacher at the time, I remember he would be pretty annoyed at me for actually bringing in that restrictiveness into the fine art class, because I would, start to have practice restraint. And he was somebody that wanted to be really expressive. And so we'd have this banter and this debate all the time. I think I remember him ripping up a lot of my paintings at the time and telling me to start again. But, that's, I think that was a really good defining moment for me, because it did teach me to balance both sides and to have the graphic design component and mixed with the fine art component, I think really actually shaped me. Looking back on it, shaped me to who I am today and the journey that I'd been on.
Mm. And did you start collecting art as well, or mostly creating art of your own?
I think it was more, yeah, I would say it was more creating art of my own. I didn't really, I collected things back then, it was like, collecting football stickers or collecting, pogs or things like that. But I wasn't really like into, collecting art. I think there were little nuanced things I like to collect. But I wasn't really into collecting art at the time. I was definitely more into like creating. What could I make? How could I be expressive and tell stories from quite a young age, I think. And there was this moment actually where we have these exams at school, and it's like just the formal exams when you're around 16 years old, and they're called GCSEs. And I actually did quite well in science at the time. And it was actually like a double credit in science, and ended up getting A's and A stars in that. And I thought, oh wow, let me be, maybe I want to be a doctor, or let me do something to do with, the sciences. And I went to take those subjects at A level, and it was miserable. And I remember seeing my art teacher in the hallway, and he would barge me and say, "Why aren't you in my class?" And I ended up quitting, and I ended up going back to what my passion really was. And that's when I really knew, like, this was it. This is what I want to do.
That's pretty lucky, man. Because I think most people, well, one is I think you've got parents that were supportive of it along the way. I think compared to my parents, I think it was like, math and English and all those fundamental ones, and sort of push you a certain direction. But it was nice that you sort of didn't have to choose, but also you could sort of pursue what you really loved, and more importantly, I think you were able to identify what you really loved early on, because I think not many people do, man. So and I guess it's probably led you to where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, that I'm just yeah, I'm really thankful for, because that is not that normal. And I just feel fortunate actually for those people in my life, like being barged in a corridor and my teacher actually saying, "Why aren't you in my class?" and changing my mind. Because all of these decisions we make, every decision you make leads you down different paths. And I mean, I will get into it, but I mean, looking back, there's certain decisions I made and these patterns that I saw now in retrospect that led me here. And it was quite intricate how things happen and how I actually even ended up in LA, to be honest.
Yeah, do you wanna share some of those moments, and I guess there's some of those threads that sort of that you were talking about?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So after high school, you pick what A levels you want to do, and there's only three, and you drop everything else. And so it was fine art, design, and I did sociology at the time because I was interested in how the mind works, and society and societal norms. And I found that to be a very interesting subject just to pair with the arts. And then when you go to university, you take one course, and that's all you do. You don't have to do English or maths or any other subject, which I've had conversations with people out here, and it sounds like a lot because you have to do a lot more. Um, so I got accepted into Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, and it was to do a foundation course at the time. And what that does is it exposes you to different subjects, from fashion to typography, illustration, multimedia. And you then have a choice at the end of that course to decide which pathway you want to take. But it was pretty good. I mean, it was intense at the time, but I do value the opportunity to actually, sample all of those topics. And Central St. Martin's had a huge pedigree. I mean, a lot of really famous designers and artists had been through there, and I really wanted to stay there, and I didn't get in. And I got denied. My portfolio wasn't artsy enough. Maybe it just wasn't good enough. But when I spoke to them, they said it was a little bit too restricted. See the pattern there, right? And Central St. Martin's was quite expressive, quite experimental. So the teacher at the time, he was my typography tutor, and he said, "Oh, why don't you check out this college called London College of Printing?" And they were changing their name at the time to London College of Communication. And I thought, what? I didn't really know too much about it, so I took my portfolio there because now I was getting worried. I didn't get into my first choice, and I didn't really plan for a backup. And I ended up getting accepted, and it was a pathway that got you onto the degree, right? The Bachelor of Fine Arts. So I ended up doing that, and again, it was a little bit more of like an explorative course. It was a year course, and I really focused on typography at the time. And the tutors there were very, very good typographers, and I don't know if they just saw something in me, but they really pushed me down that direction.
So, Simon, can you help me just try and understand exactly, what kinds of things you learn in typography? Because I remember listening to Steve Jobs' speech, and I think the one about connecting the dots, and he mentioned that he took up a typography class randomly as well, and sort of a reason why Apple font is seen to be as beautiful as it actually is. But could you share a little bit about what you sort of learned in typography? I'm just curious as to what
Yeah,
kinds of things you guys go through.
yeah, of course. So the school that I went to was the art school was very traditional. They had a lot of really good typographers and designers that had gone through there, and like Neville Brody, etc. And I didn't really understand a lot of what they were trying to teach in the beginning. We would have to cut out these black strips of paper, and then compose them on the page and put them up on the wall, and then they would grade us on like the composition of these black strips. And I knew what they were trying to get at. It's like composition and hierarchy, but there's a lot of this, and this went on for for days. And I remember questioning, like, did I make the right decision here? And then they would take us downstairs into the letterpress studio, and would have us manually configure the type, with the leading and the kerning, and teaching us about letter spacing and line spacing, and it was all manual. And then we would go back upstairs, and then we would do it with the paper cutouts, and look at the spacing between each line and each word, and then compose these. Actually, I wish I kept some of them, like some of these actual really beautiful compositions with just like black lines that we would compose. So yeah, it was a very, very manual, hands-on process, and it was all about the craft. And they focused on really teaching us how to think. And that was my introduction to typography and letterpress. It was in a very traditional way. And then they allowed us to then go onto the computer and graduate onto, using the Mac and selecting typefaces. Um, and I remember there was one turning point where, you know, I kind of found my way in typography and really fell in love with the art form. And it was just this simple black and white poster with some red type in there from my memory. And I think that was when I actually got some respect from my tutors there. Um, I remember they were saying, "Yeah, this is what we're talking about." Um, and then the rest was history. I started to research the greats, and really got um, really got a lot of love, or actually, let me rephrase that. I really fell in love with Swiss design and Swiss typography, like Joseph Muller Brockman. I really appreciated the work of Wim Crowell. Obviously, out here, like looking at the work of Paul Ram, Philippe Applewar. There were so many. really good designers that I just went down the rabbit hole and then just like observed and researched and just became obsessive with their work, really.
So a lot of these guys, would they actually have their own fonts that are just well known that this has been designed by them?
Yeah, definitely. Like, Wim Crow and Philippe Apple are definitely, creators of their own forms. And Joseph Muller Brockman and a lot of this the Swiss um, typography. And I just really, really gravitated to it because it's hard to explain, but when you look at it, it just like makes you feel good. The way that the design and they would often, mix the typography with imagery and uh, just the hierarchy and the talent there it was just beautiful pieces of art.
Okay, and so what did you do after font school and typography school?
So I did the typography for a while, and I then transferred onto this pathway called information design. So there are three pathways. So you had typography, illustration, information design, and then there was motion design, which was this fourth pathway, this elusive thing that you could only do after 2 years. I think because there's the learning curve there and it wasn't really established, but they had it in the final 2 years. And I remember, I was doing information design because I wanted to, be able to use, imagery and typography. And I felt like maybe this is the closest thing that could actually, you know, service both of those passions of mine, right? And I knew about this motion design course. And so I ended up trying to convince them to let me switch over. The problem was I was about to go into my third year, and I hadn't done the second year of the motion design course, which meant I was a year behind. And, they were saying, well, you can't, it's such a big learning curve. I think this might be a mistake. Uh, People are going to be a year ahead of you. But I managed to convince them, and I said, look, it's on me. If I don't succeed, then that's my fault. And so they ended up letting me do it. And again, this is one of the connecting dots that time in the underground, seeing the motion posters and then convincing them to switch me over. I ended up doing the final year in motion design. And I remember they were pretty hard on me. I remember putting up some work. There was this, I think it was one afternoon, they wanted us to put up work that inspired us. And I put up the work of Kyle Cooper and Imaginary Forces at the time, which was a company in LA. And he was known for, or still is, the title sequence for Seven and Spider-Man and Superman and all of these really great title sequences at the time. And I remember finding his work because there was a small elective that I could have taken. It was offered to some students where you could become a member of the ISTD, which is the International Society of Typographic Designers. And they're, really successful designers at the time were like, either founding members or honorary members like Eric Spiekerman and Frida Sack, and Wim Crow was on the list. So I did this project, and that kind of led me into Kyle's work, or introduced me to his work, because it was all about typographic narrative. And I think if I didn't do that course, I wouldn't have found his work, wouldn't have known who he was. But I kind of pushed myself at that time out of my comfort zone and did it, and then discovered his work. So back to that moment where they wanted us to share our inspirations. And I remember he said to me at the time, he said, slow down. And I actually wrote a post about this a little while ago, and posted the report actually that he wrote to me. And he said, I think you need to slow down. These guys have been doing this for 20 years, and maybe you should almost like lower your expectations of where you're going to be. So that just became my fuel, really. I'm like, oh, okay. So, all right, you don't think I can do this. So I went home and I would go frame by frame through all of their sequences because they were online. I was on the website, and I would download the videos and I'll go frame by frame and try and figure out how they married typography with live action backplates and how they animated the typography over time. And what really attracted me to the work was the fact that you could create characters from typography and they could express an emotion or a theme, either direct or metaphorically, about the content that you're about to watch. And that alone just blew my mind. Like, it was just opened up another world to me. Like, oh, you can actually have typography animate and suggest a theme from the film or TV show. And I just loved like trying to figure out ways in which you can take typography and have it be a character and almost be an actor in its own right. Um, and so, yeah, I ended up being this, got obsessive again about this, and so what I wanted to do. And we'd get briefs from the class, and I would ignore them, and I would just create title sequences. That's all I wanted to do. I was like, this is where I want to go. I want to go into LA. I want to work for this guy if I can. But ultimately, this was what I wanted to do, and that was a very special moment because it happened early, and I feel very grateful for that, because I don't know what I would be doing if I actually didn't, stumble across that work and be inspired.
So did you just pack your bags to LA? Was that an easy decision, or were you pontificating a little bit about that move?
Yeah, it wasn't an easy decision. I mean, how it all went down really was, at the end of our course, we have a thesis, the dissertation, and I crafted my dissertation around typographic narrative in film title design. And I sent Kyle an email, just a cold, like, cold DM, but it was a cold email at the time, to ask him if he would mind giving me some, some kind of extract from, how he interprets typographic narrative in the work that he does. Could he provide me with a paragraph, maybe, or a couple sentences? And I heard nothing. 2 months. I think I was about a week away from handing it in. This email popped up. And I remember my heart was racing. I was like, wow, this guy actually got back to me. I thought it was game over. That much time went by. And he wrote me this really thoughtful paragraph. And I ended up thanking him, of course, included it in my dissertation. And I said to him, would he be interested in seeing some work, at the end when I'm finished and, doing my kind of final year review. And he just said, yeah, sure. Like, that was it, actually. I think it was a one-word answer. It was actually a sure. I was like, all right, it's probably not really feeling me like that, but let me see. I'll throw my hat in the ring. So anyway, fast forward to finishing up, I managed to get them online. A good friend of mine helped me get the right codec. It was H.264 at the time, and the videos were really heavy. And I remember, again, very grateful for him to be able to help me figure out how to get these up on a website. Sent him the work and got an email back within the next 24 hours, and he just said, I think the work is great. If you wanted to come here, I'll give you a visa in a minute.
So you've basically been in LA ever since?
It was like since 2005 was when I came over here. Yeah, so long time ago. And so, yeah, came over, and boy, like, I was not ready for the work ethic. A lot of really talented people came from, I mean, you'd hire people from everywhere in the world. And, I was just really fortunate at the time that the phone never stopped ringing at the company. There would be a lot of high profile work that we would touch. And I feel
What, yeah,
like, in the,
what kind of projects or high profile work
yeah,
would you be working on?
yeah, I mean, we would go to all these studios, like all the studios I heard from, as a kid, like I've heard about as a kid, it's like going to Sony and Warner Brothers and Disney, and, the projects like Iron Man was coming in the door. And I remember Superman Returns at the time came in, like another company, I think, fumbled it. And so, they had to take the job. And it was just like every big blockbuster movie.
Huge, huge, amazing. And then was that when were you working with them when you got an Emmy nomination as well? Like, how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, the Emmy nomination came at a time where I, it was just after I sort of decided that I really wanted to do this creative director thing. And the second point that I wanted to make was there's this time in, I think, every creative's life where you have a choice whether you're going to stay on the box and you're going to make, and you're going to, really perfect the craft in that way, or you're going to go down the art director, creative director route. And it's a conflict. And I had many discussions about it. And, eventually, a good friend of mine at the time, I still collaborate with from time to time, Paul Mitchell, and, great designer, director. It's like a brother from another mother to me. He said, you really want to be in control of like the vision. And so I decided to go down that route, kind of begrudgingly, because I love the craft. And one of my first projects as a creative director was that title sequence Elementary. And I remember people saying at the time, don't expect it to be this easy, because it went really well. The shoot went great. It was one of my first experiences directing on set. And the opportunities that we got were just sort of almost endless. It's like, working with teams of animators, and, oh, you've never directed before, but here you go. You're going to go on set and direct and, lead the team and work with the DP. And it's just like, trial by fire every single time. And yeah, it ended up being successful. And we, myself and the editor, Nate, we sat in the bay and edited it in one day. It was over a weekend. And yeah, it was just really well received. And kind of surreal looking back, like, being at the Emmys and nomination for like this, probably the second thing I directed for. But really, really
Amazing,
thankful for that opportunity.
amazing. Would you continue to do anything like that anymore? I guess maybe that's maybe perhaps what you're doing right now. Maybe you can share a little bit more about how your transition into Apple was and what you're sort of doing there now.
Yeah. So I stayed at the company for about 10 years. It felt like it was time, to make a change. And I thought, well, let me try and see what it'd be like to build something, like build a company doing the same thing. And, pitching against, we ended up pitching against like a lot of the same companies. And I left with a producer friend of mine, and we forward at this company doing really well, Magnopus. And I did that for about a year. And we would do direct to client work and try to, build up our portfolio as a company. And it wasn't, obviously, you have all these ideas of how it could be, but obviously it wasn't as easy as we thought. Because when you can have the best portfolio in the world, you go and do it yourself, you're kind of starting from scratch. All that work was done under another company. You have to be clean, you got to start again, you can't misrepresent the work, etc. So I ended up at that time, there were so many companies that had broken off from the larger companies, and there was a lot of competition at the time. The budgets were going down. There were people willing to do it in their garage for like half the price, and, we would lose bids or have to do work for cheap. And we did pretty well. We did get some like really interesting work, but I had just thought, like this, I don't want to swim in the same sea as everybody else. So ended up freelancing around LA a little bit and collaborating with some larger companies and, setting up teams there, looking at my Rolodex, thinking about, what talent we could bring into those studios where maybe they didn't necessarily have the infrastructure or talent to do, let's say, more like high-end visual effects work, or CG work. So I ended up collaborating with a few companies doing that, and that was a lot of fun actually, because I was brought in and I had the trust as a creative director, and I could bring in people who I really enjoyed working with, and get the job done and expand and contract and just replicate that formula actually. And then got to a point, I think it was actually just before COVID, and that's when I got the email from Apple and had a phone call with them. And I was not at the time ready to do that. I had a lot of anxiety about going into a corporation of that size, because I felt like I had this quote unquote freedom. I was waking up when I wanted to, although not really, because I still had to work, but I just had this flexibility. I knew that if I signed up, like I would be regimentally in at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. My whole day would be structured around obviously the company you're working for. So I thought about it for a long time, and I stayed in the interview process because I wanted to really understand what this could be. And I'm not going to just say no to Apple like that. That would be pretty stupid of me to do that. So the longer I stayed in the process and went on the interviews and met more of the people that were there, and I remember the guy at the time, that was doing the hiring, we basically representing Apple as as the face, obviously the recruiter. We just got on really well, and we bonded. And I was like, well, if he's representing the company like this, I mean, places to must be really good, because he was a really good guy, and we really got on. So it went further and further and further, and I remember you have like one big interview with probably like 6 or 7 people, and then all these individual ones. And I ended up thinking about it for a while, and then COVID happened, and it went on pause for about 4 months. Didn't hear from them for a little while, so I reached out, and then they got me back in for another chat, and I decided to do it at that point. And I think what I sensed was that I could have the opportunity to be entrepreneurial there, because there were certain questions I asked around, like, would I be able to build? Would I be able to have my own team? Would I be able to, work with, perhaps people that that I'd worked with in the past? And obviously that's never a guarantee, but I did get a sense that I could build. And so that's why I ended up taking that position.
So Simon, so can you tell us a little bit more about, what does a creative director do for Apple TV?
Yeah, so the day to day, I mean, it has changed a lot since I got there, but now I have a group of creative directors that are on my team, and I was able to build out the design team and the animation and editorial team, obviously in partnership with other creatives there. And my day to day really is about guiding the creative and the vision, and guiding the creatives themselves, to be able to clear the path for them to do the best work that they can do. And I think that's the big nuance from being a designer and then being like the sort of creative in the leadership role that I have. It's most of my day is really trying to figure out how to clear that path so that they can excel. And then also, get the work through the organization. Apple is a place where there's obviously a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people have to agree. And so I really enjoy that process of figuring out how to move these fragile ideas through the organization, right, to get sign off and approval, whether it's a brief, whether it's a piece of artwork, whether it's, piece of motion or editorial. There's a lot that goes into it behind the scenes. And that is probably like it takes up a huge percentage of my time, but luckily have a team of really talented creatives around me, and I also take a lot of time with them to talk about the nuances and the soft skills that are required and the human aspect of creativity, that a lot of us experience that is not really spoken about, but you do experience it. Whether it's like we've talked about the imposter syndrome, and if you're new in a place, you kind of feel like a fish out of water, and just really encouraging the team to push through and be successful.
Gotcha. Super fascinating, and what a journey you've had. And it's really interesting to hear about your art and appreciation for art coming through, and those threads coming through. I guess my next question is what ultimately led you into CryptoPunks?
Good friend of mine introduced me to Ethereum back in 2017, and we'd have all of these conversations. Back then, he was into developing. He was more on the technical side, I was more on the art side, and he called me up one day and said, "You got to look at this." And so he convinced me to go down the rabbit hole and start researching what Ethereum was. I already knew about Bitcoin. I hadn't bought any. Me and my friend, we were going to buy a miner at one point. Probably should have done that, but didn't.
Oh,
So we missed out.
when was this, Simon? Like, what sort of timestamp are we talking about?
So the conversation I had was in 2017. But before that, when I did know about Bitcoin, it must have been at least a few years before that, but I didn't really do anything with that information. As most of us did. But yeah, Ethereum just really captured my attention, and it was at the time when I think there was a bit of a bull market happening, and he was telling me about, the financial side of it, and he was looking at the smart contract side of things. And I just loved this idea of like, the world computer and peer-to-peer transactions. And I dove right into it. And I remember setting up an exchange at the time and waiting about a month to be approved. And so that gave me enough time to actually really, research and educate myself around what Ethereum was. And so I ended up buying a few coins at the time. Yeah, I ended up getting approved on the platform, on the exchange, and bought some Ethereum. And like I was saying, it was a bit of a bull run at the time, and got excited about everything, going up, and bought a little bit more. And I was already investing in stocks at the time. And I was familiar with the concept of just dollar cost averaging and buying what you like. And so I applied that to my thesis for investing in Ethereum and Bitcoin at the time. And, I couldn't put anything major in, but I just thought if I just maybe keep buying this thing that I believe in, maybe at least someday it might pay off. So I did that for a few years, and I remember it went down to like $99, and I just thought, well, let me not sell. I'm gonna just hold on to this. Maybe might be a little risky to keep buying it, so I just held out, and I think went through the crypto winter. I remember going back to London at the time, and everyone and their mother was asking me, "What coins do you have?" And what coins are you buying? And I thought, oh no, this is pretty bad at that point. I was like, something's gonna happen. It can't be that good. You're in the barber shop and people are, talking about what coins you have, and I was like, yeah, this is now um felt like a bit of a bubble to me. And what happened, and it crashed back down. But yeah, I was not buying anything else but Ethereum, Bitcoin, and maybe a little bit of Chainlink, but that was about it. I wasn't really going too wide.
Yep. And then when did you discover CryptoPunks after buying all that ETH?
So what really got my attention, I think this must have been around, what was it, like 2021-ish, I think, when NFTs became a thing. And I was busy, but then what caught my attention was like people in our industry started to like do really well, started to mint artwork. um Raoul Marx started to do really well, G Monk, Beeple obviously sold his. And obviously grabbed my attention. And it's funny, it's one of those things where until it's sort of like in your kind of immediate purview that you really start paying attention. And yeah, I wasn't at that time like trying to like mint my own artwork, but I was just paying attention to it now. And I sort of forgot about it. I was like, okay, well, I don't really have the time to start making my own art like this. Like I just left my position, and I was still at that point like grinding and trying to like really you know get my footing at Apple. And it just wasn't the right time. So I remember driving one time and listening to this interview with Punk 6529, and I was like, wow, this guy is like really passionate about NFTs and Web3 in general, but NFTs and Ethereum and everything else. And it just stood out to me. I think I must have listened to that interview like 3 or 4 times. And it was one of those moments that just really inspired me. And I started to pay a lot more attention, speaking about it more, and got introduced to some NFT projects, like the Zuki and Doodles and a bunch of the PFP projects. I was also keeping an eye on the art as well. And I did dabble. I dabbled a bit. I dabbled in some of those projects. And I remember this year really thinking about um, like digital identity, and this kind of I don't know, this kind of notion that your identity in the digital world will become, well, will be as important, or if not more important than your identity in the real world. And that is something that I really sort of marinated on for a long time. And I was at this point where I was like, well, how do I really want to be represented? And one thing that I'm really big on is alignment and reputation equity. And it's about who you speak to most, where you spend your most time, and all of these things, they really affect your thought patterns. And I thought, well, if I want to align myself, like really align myself and take this seriously with a community, from all of my research and just being around, and like obviously being on Twitter at the time, or X, and just I was looking at who was I really paying attention to, who was I following, and what were people saying. And I thought it has to be CryptoPunks. Like there wasn't any other community that I really wanted to like align myself with, moving forward. And there's a lot of I think even now, attention spans are really low. And I think the desire for, instant gratification is really high. So if you got low attention span and you've got this desire for instant gratification really high, it's, I don't know, like it didn't seem like a good recipe to me. And I found like, I wrote this when I did get my punk, that, punks are, you know, they are just punks. It's like I didn't feel like the community was like waiting for the next drop, or what's the next announcement, or announcement of an announcement. Like it just is. And I really valued that, and I valued people who I was following at the time. And there was this leadership sensibility in the space as a whole. And I felt like there were builders that were building for the space as a whole, and not necessarily just the project itself. And that was really attractive to me, like really, really attractive. So yeah, it was definitely an alignment thing for me. And I just love simplicity. And, a lot of other things just felt really complicated to me.
Yeah, I think it's nice to hear that you've got an eye for aesthetics, and you've picked a CryptoPunk to be your online identity, um, which is kind of nice as well. Which when you were going to buying your Punk 4507, normal black beard and grey forward cap is super clean as well. Were you looking at any other traits? Do you want to have a quick chat around, I guess, your buying process?
Yeah, of course. So I was actually joking with some friends of mine. I wasn't really joking, but it must have been around May, June. Yeah, if I bought the punk in July, and I told them, I'm making a crypto punk fund for myself. I'm gonna go in and rotate out of some projects, or some crypto that I had, and start stacking up the ETH. To I didn't have. I mean, this Punk 4507 was listed for like 100 ETH. And I didn't have that just lying around, so I had to figure it out. But I knew I wanted it, and that was my goal, and that was my target. And they were joking, asking, "Well, how's the fun going?" I was like, "Oh, it's good. It's building it up." And through that time, I would look at all of these traits, and I really was really, really gravitating towards the beanie trait, actually. And there was one punk in particular, is I have it up here, is 6039. And what's it listed for today? It's offered for what, 8.8 million dollars. So I quickly realized, see, beanies were not a affordable trait for me.
What number was it?
It's 8785, CryptoPunk 8785. One of 6039 male punks. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
it's cool.
785. So I was looking at this guy. I was like, well, that's out of the equation. And then I started to look at the hoodie punks. And obviously there's some really great, I'd say, owners of those punks, and very influential. And yeah, I was like, well, let me pause for a second and think, what's going to really represent me. And so I was scrolling down, and I was like, all right, this one is great. And I loved like the funky hair. And I was looking at a couple with the red hair, or the even looking at like some of the female traits were amazing. I know they're like definitely more limited. And I was like, oh, let me just really step back and take my time. And then I found Punk 4507, and I was like, well, this really represents me. I mean, the skin tone, the beard, the gray cap. Sometimes, occasionally wear caps. I used to wear caps a long time ago, when I was a bit younger. But yeah, it just really stood out to me amongst everything that was around it. But it was still listed really high. So I ended up trying to hunt down the owner, um, David, at the time. and I found his Twitter, but I couldn't DM him because he wasn't following me. And I reached out to Punk's OTC, and I said, "Hey, I'm really interested in getting into punks, and these are some punks that I was really interested in, and they all pretty much look like Punk 4507. One of them had an earring, one of them was a slightly darker skin tone or whatever. And he said these are going to be really pricey punks, but let me see what I can do and see if there's anyone in my Rolodex or ecosystem that I know that owns these. And I just thought this is going to be like a needle in a haystack to find this guy. And I remember I was sitting at home and I got the DM from David. And we started this conversation, and he was like a really nice guy. And we just developed like a good friendship. We had a lot of banter for days. Just, he knew I was interested in buying the punk, but the conversation, it wasn't just about that. And, eventually we got down into like what the offer could be. But what I just really appreciated the conversation, and just really appreciated that he seemed like a really solid guy. Just really smart, was doing great things, and just got on with him. Yeah. And so we ended up making a deal. He said he at least wanted to break even. I was trying to go a little lower. But it's like fair, let's do the 88 ETH. It wasn't 100, so I was happy. And always, I was always taught, if you're gonna make a deal, it's like no one can be out there popping champagne and being like, oh, hey, I got this great deal. I think if both sides really think that, all right, that's a good deal. I feel all right about that. I think if both sides think that way, then he broke even. I got the punk I wanted. I didn't pay 100 ETH. You know, I I think that was
Nice.
great. Yeah.
It's nice to also hear, because I think, when people hear about Punk's OTC, I think some have got negative connotations in that, he's just flipping, but also at the same time, he's adding liquidity to the pool. But it sounds like he was trying to help you find your punk in some ways too, right? So I think, it's nice to sort of be able to marry up people with, punk that they sort of vibe with, so
Yeah, and honestly, like I didn't know how that was gonna go. I thought, is he gonna ask me for some kind of finder's fee for introducing me to David or something? And hey, he was just cool. He wasn't about that. He's just, oh, yeah, I said to him, "Oh, thank you very much for doing this," and I managed to strike the deal with David, and he was like, "I'm really happy for you. Like, congratulations." And that was it. Um, so altogether, if you see the experience just from out of the gate, day one was just really, really smooth, and really respectful. And I remember going to my first CryptoPunks event, the one in Charleston that Beeple threw, probably a month or two afterwards. And just, yeah, everyone I met was just, they were on their mission. They're extremely creative, extremely intelligent people. And I remember sitting back I think it was at the brunch, and just thinking, man, if everyone here, this could be an amazing company with all of the talent that was here and everything that everyone's doing. And I was like, just wow, like it just felt really good to be part of this community.
absolutely.
So very, very grateful to Punks OTC, David, for hooking me up with Punk 4507.
Amazing. And, if money wasn't an issue, which punk would you be eyeing down?
I think it would have had to. I mean, the one punk that stood out for me was 8785. I mean
The
that.
beanie punk. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the price aside, I don't know. I just love the beanie. I love the hoodie punks. There's so many traits, but that one just really stood out to me as one. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy. When you're happy, when you feel like you've made the right decision, is when you can look at what you've acquired, or the piece of art, and you can look at it every day. and I'm not getting bored. I'm not finding this little thing about it that I don't like, or I wish I had done that. I'm just very content.
Yeah, amazing. As a clean punk, so you did extremely well. Um, and when you look across into the punk community, and I think obviously you've been to Charleston to meet some of these punks in real life. Do you have a a favorite punk or a series of punks that would be your favorite?
Yeah, there's just so many people who I have met along the way. Obviously, Punk 6529 was the punk that the personality that actually really brought me into wanting to investigate more about punks and NFTs in general, right? Like, so I have to, really give props there. And I just think, guy's got a mission. It's very clear. Um, he's very passionate, and yeah, that was my inspiration. But along the way, I've met so many, like Derek, amazing story. You interviewed him probably about a month or two ago, and I remember listening to that, and we were talking before that, and just discussing our art together and everything that he's creating and where he came from. Just yeah, really love what he's doing and his successes of late. Just can't be happier for him, and um, many others. Falco welcomed me into the community, open arms. I had some questions for him, when I was buying my squiggle, and he pointed me in the right direction and just gave me his thoughts about it. Um, B, um, you know, Pixel Pete, again, amazing character. Sergio, there's just so many, like, some I obviously speak to, more than others, but I just think being surrounded by these influential creators in the space, it's just, yeah, couldn't be happier.
Punks are stacked. I keep trying to message that out. I mean, yeah, you've joined a massive cohort of really wonderful, successful, accomplished people, and you're definitely sort of up there. You just talk about imposter sort of syndrome. I think I'm exactly that as well, right? In some ways, I sort of feel like you know, hanging out with or trying to call myself a punk with all these people is I sort of sometimes feel like an imposter, right? Because everybody's just accomplished so much with what they're sort of doing to push the Web3 space forward. So super inspiring and grateful, just like you, to be part of the community. Um, and how would you describe punk culture for you?
That's a very good question. Um, I honestly, with my short time being in the community and witnessing the culture, um, it's a culture of, I feel, just builders, and educators, and people who are just very open with their time, very giving. Just fantastic creatives and artists that are, for the most part, like also really wanting to do things for good. And that really, I was at the Charleston event, and uh, I think it was B said it, that punks can be a force for good. And I really gravitate towards that because it's a community of builders, and there's so much money in the space, and so much, like, money go up, and the financial component of NFTs and crypto in general. But I really feel like so many people in the community are just really about how do we take this to the next level, and that's something that I really appreciate, from my time so far being here and the conversations that I've had with everybody.
Yeah, punks keep it real, which is nice.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and I know you've just been into the community just for a small period of time, but maybe just quickly, with V1 punks, how do you feel about them? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I feel, to me, it's like thumbs up. Like I don't have a huge horse in the race, but I think it's fine. It happens, right? Like I think people would want to support V1 punks. Everyone has their choice of where they want to go. Whether there's a hard fork in the chain, or what side you want to go. And I think, yeah, for me it's thumbs up, and I'm pretty neutral with that conversation.
Cool. And how do you feel about, I guess, Yuga's involvement with CryptoPunks IP in general?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was big news when it happened. Obviously, I didn't have an invested interest when it did happen, but I think thinking about it at the time for the space, um, I think that the founders like Matt and John, it's like it just was. I think maybe it got too big. It wasn't something that they felt like they really wanted to continue at that level. And I think finding Yuga to kind of carry that torch, I think it was a good move. Again, not having that invested interest at the time, but still thinking like, well, if it was going to go somewhere, I think the experience that Yuga does have in the space, only time would tell. And I think the big thing about what I see with punks and thing that I value is it's like you don't have to do too much with the project. It's almost like the great thing about punks is like just kind of leave it alone. And so far, they have done that. And I think so long as it's respected in that way, um, I think that's fine.
Cool. Yeah, I'm probably with you as well. I think there's not a lot much we would expect from punks as a community for Yuga to sort of do anything. Anything else is a bit of a bonus. Um, and if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk 4507, what would you like to say to them?
Yeah, I thought a lot about because I noticed you ask people this a lot. The funny thing is, I don't think my punk will have another owner. There's only two ways someone will own my punk, and one, like my future kids will inherit Punk 4507, to which I would be honored to pass down a piece of internet history. And two, if someone drained my wallet and stole it, so to which my message would not be very friendly at all. So I think those are the two ways, and hopefully it's number one. And I would just encourage to carry the torch, to hold on to this piece of history, and really make sure I explain the value of of the community of Punk 4507, what it meant to me, and to handle it gracefully.
Amazing. And hopefully your future children will all have the opportunity to hear this one day when they're rocking the punk on Twitter or whatever it is going to be the next sort of platform. Um, Simon, this was super fun getting to know you and your story. What a fantastic journey you've been on, and it's nice to sort of and refreshing to speak to somebody in the punk community that's a little bit different in terms of background and all the things that you're sort of doing. But I'll definitely be watching Apple TV with a different lens now. I'll be wondering if you'd be working on some of these things. But again, thank you so much for joining Punkcast. I guess any final closing comments, and what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, I'm mainly active on X, so that's at Simon_Clowes, and that's the best place to find me right now. That's where I spend most of my social media time, and communicating with people and getting to know everyone else in the community.
Nice. And guys, that wraps up an episode of Punkcast for the week, and we'll be back next week with another amazing punk. Bye for now.